My name is Alexei Morozov, and what I'm about to tell you might sound like the ravings of a man who's been alone too long. But I swear by all that's holy, every word is true. I still wake up in a cold sweat when I recall those 7 days and nights at observation post number 17. Command told me it was a routine assignment, that I'd be monitoring enemy movements through optics and relaying coordinates via radio. No one warned me about what happens in those woods after sunset. The observation post was situated on a hill surrounded by dense pines 20 kilometers from the front line. It was a small bunker dug into the earth and camouflaged with branches and sod. Inside, there was barely room for a cot, a table with a radio set, and a small stash of provisions. The only window faced the valley where enemy patrols were expected to appear. Thick log walls, covered with nearly a meter of earth, provided protection from shrapnel and bullets. The air inside was always stale, reeking of dampness, tobacco, and the sweat of previous observers. The first day passed without incident. I scanned the terrain through binoculars, tuned the radio, and checked the food and water supplies. Canned rations, crackers, a few packs of cigarettes, and a thermos of strong tea. Everything I'd need to sustain myself for the next 7 days. In the bunker, I found notes left by previous observers, pencil-scrawled pages with coordinates, timestamps, and brief remarks about enemy movements. The handwriting varied, but in the most recent entries, I noticed signs of unease. Letters grew uneven, lines slanted, and some words were so heavily scratched out they were illegible. Contact with command was maintained twice daily, at 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening. Short, business-like exchanges, coordinates, number of enemy soldiers spotted, direction of their movement. After the evening call, the hardest part began. The long, solitary night. Sleep was allowed only in brief snatches. I had to stay vigilant. Though little could be seen in the dark, even with night vision gear, sounds carried clearly. The crack of twigs underfoot, the rustle of leaves, distant gunfire. The second night, I barely slept. Not out of fear of missing the enemy, but because of strange noises that started around midnight. At first it seemed like a large animal, a bear or an elk, was nearby. Heavy, deliberate steps on wet ground, snorting, and occasional scratching of claws against tree bark. I grabbed my rifle and peeked outside several times, but saw nothing in the darkness. The sounds continued until dawn, growing closer then fading, as if something was circling my shelter, studying it. In the morning, I carefully inspected the ground around the bunker. There were no animal tracks, but I found several strange marks in the soft soil. They resembled footprints of bare human feet, but far larger than normal, with deep, long scratches from toenails. The distance between prints was too great for a person of average height. I tried to convince myself they were left by a local, perhaps a deserter hiding in the woods, but the explanation felt hollow. During the day, while observing the valley through binoculars, I couldn't stop thinking about the nighttime sounds. My military training offered rational explanations, echoes from distant shots, the creak of trees cooling after the day's heat, the wind in the branches. But my instincts, honed by months in combat zones, screamed of danger. Something was wrong with this place. Something command hadn't mentioned when assigning me here. By the evening of the third day, I noticed that the previous observer's notes contained more than just military data. Scrawled between lines of coordinates and timestamps were odd remarks in tiny handwriting. "It's walking again. Came closer tonight. Don't sleep until dawn. I think it understands." The last entry, made a week ago by my predecessor, Senior Sergeant Kovalev, whom I'd relieved, was nearly illegible by the end of his stint. His final words, written in a trembling hand, read, "It knows I'm here. Leaving tomorrow at any cost." The evening radio call went as usual. I reported a quiet situation, received orders to continue observation. The radio man's voice sounded so distant, almost unreal, as if coming from another world. After the call, I locked myself in the bunker, checked my rifle, and braced for another sleepless night. This time, I was ready for whatever might come in the dark. The noises started earlier than usual at dusk. First a distant wail, long and mournful, like a lament for the dead. Then footsteps, but they sounded different. Not like an animal's tread, but like something trying to mimic human steps, clumsily. A step, a pause, another step, another pause, as if the creature stopped to listen after each movement. I lay on the cot, clutching my rifle, straining to hear every sound. The footsteps grew closer, circling the bunker. At times I heard scraping as if something sharp was clawing at the wooden walls. Then silence fell, but I knew it was still there, just outside. The air in the bunker grew even heavier, and a strange smell appeared. A mix of rot, wet earth, and something wild, primal. Around 3 a.m, a sound made my blood run cold. Something was scratching at the earth directly above my head, trying to dig through the thick layer of sod and soil on the bunker's roof. The sound was methodical, relentless. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like massive claws raking through the dirt, tunneling toward me. I imagined something horrific crouched above my shelter in the darkness, digging toward its defenseless prey. The scratching continued for nearly an hour, then stopped abruptly. In the ensuing silence, I heard only my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. It seemed the creature had gone. But minutes later, a new sound began. A faint tapping on the bunker's wooden wall. Not clawing, but tapping, as if someone was knocking with their knuckles trying to get my attention. The tapping was rhythmic. 3 short taps, a pause, 3 long taps, another pause, 3 short taps again. Morse code. Someone was tapping Morse code on my shelter's wall. I knew the alphabet and recognized the message, SOS. A distress signal repeated over and over for half an hour. But who could be sending it here? In the middle of a remote forest, in the dead of night. And why would the creature that had just tried to claw through my roof now be signaling for help? By the morning of the 4th day, I was on the verge of a breakdown. I hadn't slept properly in 2 days, surviving on canned food and strong tea, smoking one cigarette after another. My hands shook from exhaustion and stress. My eyes were bloodshot from straining in the dark. I knew a few more nights like this would break me. Inspecting the area around the bunker in daylight, I found new tracks. There were many now, forming an almost complete ring around my shelter. They varied. Some resembled prints of massive bare feet. Others looked like paws of an unknown beast, and some defied description. But they all led to one conclusion. I was not alone in this forest, and whatever came at night was growing bolder. Among the old records, I found a notebook hidden under the cot's mattress. It didn't belong to Kovalev, but to someone earlier. Judging by the dates, the entries were made 3 months ago. The handwriting was neat, almost calligraphic, but the content chilled me to the bone. Day 1, strange noises at night, probably wild animals. Day 3, animals don't leave, circling the bunker, leaving tracks. Day 5, not animals, mimicking human movements, but imprecisely, like they're learning to be human. Day 7, it's trying to speak. I hear fragments of words outside the wall. My voice. It's mimicking my voice. The final entry was written in a trembling hand. Can't take it anymore. It knows my name. Calls me by name in my own voice. Tomorrow I'll try to leave. If anyone finds these notes, don't stay here at night. Ever. The signature was illegible, but the date was clear. Exactly 1 week after the first entry. So the observer lasted only 7 days, just as I was supposed to. The sense of unreality grew with every hour. I began doubting my own perceptions, wondering if I was losing my mind from solitude and stress. Military psychologists had warned about such states: prolonged isolation, constant tension, and fear could trigger hallucinations and paranoia. I clung to this thought like a lifeline, but deep down, I knew what was happening was real. The evening call on the 4th day didn't go as smoothly as usual. When I turned on the radio, there were strange interferences. A low-frequency hum mixed with crackling and faint sounds resembling human speech. The radio man at base repeatedly asked for my call sign, complaining about poor reception. I had to repeat my report 3 times before the connection stabilized. Even then, a faint whisper in an unknown language lingered in the headphones. After the call, I tried tuning the radio to other frequencies, thinking the interference was due to technical issues. But every frequency carried the same sounds. A low hum, crackling, and that eerie whisper. Occasionally, I could make out Russian words spoken in a strange, not quite human voice. Alexei, come closer. Open the door. Don't be afraid. These words repeated as if someone was trying to lure me outside. I turned off the radio and sat on the cot trying to collect my thoughts. The logical part of my mind suggested the interference could be from atmospheric conditions or enemy electronic warfare. But why was my name in the static? How could an unknown voice know it? I never used my name on air, only my call sign. The 4th night began before sunset. The dusk thickened unnaturally fast, as if darkness was swallowing the forest, eager to hide something from daylight. I noticed even the birds fell silent earlier than usual. Normally, forest sounds faded gradually, but today, silence descended abruptly, like a command. It was so unnatural it gave me goosebumps. The noises started right after full darkness, but they were different now. Instead of aimless wandering around the bunker, I heard sounds that could be called a conversation, if not for their eerie nature. Several voices were talking to each other a few meters from my shelter. They sounded human but had something unnatural. Wrong intonations, odd pauses between words, sounds no human could make. I pressed my face to the observation slit, trying to see something in the dark. The night vision gear showed only trees and bushes, but the voices were right there. One was particularly clear, speaking Russian phrases with an intonation that suggested it was repeating memorized words without understanding them. Soldier sleeps. Soldier is afraid. Soldier is alone. We know the soldier. I realized these creatures were discussing me. They knew I was listening and were speaking deliberately for me to hear. This wasn't a chance encounter with wild animals or locals. It was a calculated psychological attack. Something was studying me, probing my character, my fears, my weaknesses. And judging by the previous observer's notes, this tactic had been used before. Around midnight, the voices stopped, but I knew the creatures hadn't left. They had moved to the next phase of their plan. Moments later, what I feared most began. They started mimicking human voices. At first, it was garbled attempts at single sounds, then words, then full phrases. The worst part was they were copying my own voice. "Alexei, open the door," said my voice from just outside the bunker's entrance. The intonation was almost perfect but carried a falseness, like a tape recording. "Alexei, I'm cold," it repeated, and the hair on my neck stood up. It was my pronunciation, my timbre, even the hoarseness from years of smoking, but there was nothing human in it. I covered my ears, trying to block out the nightmare, but the voices came not just from outside. They seemed to sound inside my head, penetrating the bunker's walls, defying my attempts to ignore them. "Alexei, why don't you answer? Alexei, I know you're scared. Alexei, come out to us." The voices multiplied as if a crowd of people with my face and voice had surrounded the bunker, demanding to be let in. By dawn on the 5th day, I was on the brink of madness. Hallucinations blended with reality. I couldn't distinguish my thoughts from the voices still echoing in my head even after daylight. To clear my mind, I stepped outside and dunked my head in a nearby stream. The cold water helped a little, but the sense of unreality lingered. Inspecting the tracks around the bunker, I found something that convinced me I wasn't insane. In the soft earth near the entrance were clear imprints of human hands. Not palms, but hands pressed fingers down into the ground, as if someone had crawled on all fours. The prints matched an adult's size, but were unnaturally positioned. Too widely spaced, too deeply pressed. Next to the handprints, I found something even more horrific, scraps of human skin caught on sharp shrub branches. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and faintly smelled of decay. Worst of all, some scraps bore tattoos. Military tattoos soldiers get. I recognized one. An anchor with VMF, Navy, written on it, identical to the one on Kovalev's left forearm. Horror gripped me at the thought of what might have happened to my predecessor. Officially, he was listed as a deserter who abandoned his post without permission. But now I understood. Kovalev didn't escape. He was consumed by something living in this forest, something that had learned to wear human forms, mimic human voices and behaviors. And now it was studying me, preparing to add another victim to its collection. All of the 5th day, I frantically tried to contact command outside the scheduled times, but the radio was silent, either broken or my signals weren't reaching the base. The airwaves carried only static and that sinister whisper, now almost constant. Sometimes it seemed the whisper came not from the radio but from the bunker's walls, as if the place itself was steeped in something evil and hostile. I started preparing to abandon the post. Orders are orders, but survival instinct outweighed military discipline. I packed essentials: weapon, ammunition, a small food supply, and a water flask. The plan was to wait for dawn and slip away under the cover of morning fog to the nearest settlement, where I could contact command and report what was happening at observation post number 17. But the 5th night began earlier than expected. Before sunset, the forest plunged into unnatural darkness, as if black clouds had blocked the sky. The air grew thick and heavy, making breathing difficult. Fog rose from the ground. Not ordinary mist, but something denser, more ominous, smelling of rot and death. The noises started immediately, coming not only from outside, but from inside the bunker. The walls creaked and groaned as if something massive was pressing down on them. The cot shook. Objects moved across the table on their own. The radio turned on by itself, replaying my past communications with the base, but distorted, slowed, with eerie pauses between words. I realized I couldn't stay in this cursed place another minute. Grabbing my rucksack and rifle, I rushed to the bunker's exit, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if it was locked from the outside or blocked by something heavy. I threw my weight against it, but it didn't budge. In desperation, I fired at the lock, but the bullet seemed to dissolve in the air, doing no damage. Behind me, I heard a familiar voice, my own voice, calling my name. I turned and saw a figure in military uniform standing in the corner of the bunker. Its face was hidden in the dim light of the kerosene lamp, but the uniform was identical to mine. The figure extended a hand toward me and repeated my name, its voice echoing like it came from a deep cave. Part 2. I froze, unable to move, staring at this horrific parody of myself. The figure was an exact copy. Same military uniform with identical insignia, same worn boots, even the same rifle slung over its shoulder. But the face... God, it was like a wax mask crafted by an unskilled sculptor who'd only seen my photograph. The features were correct but lifeless, the eyes unblinking, the mouth moving out of sync with the words coming from deep within its throat. "Who are you?" I croaked, gripping my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. My doppelganger slowly turned its head, and I heard a crunch, as if it wasn't muscles and tendons moving but something more mechanical. In the dim light of the kerosene lamp, its face looked like a mask stretched over a skull. "I am you," it replied in my voice, but the words sounded rehearsed. "You are me. We are all here. Everyone who came before you. Kovalev is here. Mikhailov is here. Sergeyev is here. Now you will be here too." With each name, its voice changed. Now hoarse, now young, now aged. This creature was speaking in the voices of all the previous observers. I tried to shoot, but my finger wouldn't obey. My hand trembled so badly it couldn't hold the weapon steady. The doppelganger approached slowly, its movements unnaturally smooth, as if it wasn't walking but gliding across the floor. With each step, its appearance became sharper, more like me, yet more terrifying. "Don't be afraid," it said, and now its voice sounded completely natural. "The pain will be brief. Then you'll become part of us. You'll help us greet the next ones, just as Kovalev helped greet you, just as you'll help greet whoever comes after you." Suddenly, I understood the full horror of the situation. This observation post was a trap. Soldiers were deliberately sent here, one at a time, isolated, defenseless. Each became part of this nightmare, joining the army of creatures that then hunted the next victim. How many had there been? How many observers had vanished in these cursed woods? Desperation gave me strength. I lunged for the window, smashed the glass with my rifle butt, and tried to climb out. Shards cut into my hands and face, but I felt no pain. All that mattered was escaping this tomb before it was too late. But as soon as I stuck my head out, something grabbed my throat with an iron grip and yanked me back. It was no longer my doppelganger. Standing before me was Senior Sergeant Kovalev, exactly as I remembered him. A sturdy man in his 40s with graying temples and a scar on his left cheek. But his eyes were dead, glassy, and from his torn sleeve protruded an arm with patches of skin missing, revealing yellowish bones. "You're resisting in vain, Morozov," he said in a voice devoid of life. "I tried to escape too. 7 days I fought like a fish against ice. Then I realized, it's good here. Peaceful. No orders, no reports, no war. Just eternal service in silence." He tightened his grip on my throat, and I began to choke. Red spots danced before my eyes, a ringing filled my ears. But in a last, desperate act, I managed to reach the grenade in my pocket. With effort, I pulled the pin and pressed it against Kovalev's chest. We had 4 seconds. "If I die, I won't die alone," I rasped. Kovalev's face twisted in a grimace of rage, but he didn't release my throat. Apparently, these creatures didn't understand death, or didn't fear it. The explosion roared in the confined space of the bunker like a hammer striking an anvil. I came to outside a few meters from the ruins of what used to be the observation post. My body ached, blood oozed from my ears, but I was alive. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky crimson. The blast had reduced the bunker to splinters, but strangest of all, there were no traces of Kovalev or my doppelganger. Only charred boards and scraps of military uniform, which in the dawn light looked like ordinary rags. I struggled to my feet, my head spinning from the concussion. My rifle was gone, likely buried in the wreckage. All I had left were a knife, a compass, and a flask of water. I needed to get out of this cursed forest as quickly as possible, while daylight offered some protection from the nighttime horrors. But the forest seemed unwilling to let me go. Paths that seemed familiar by day now led in unknown directions. The compass pointed north, but after an hour of walking, I found myself back at the stream near the bunker's ruins. I tried heading east. Same result. The forest was leading me in circles, refusing to release me from its grasp. By noon, I was exhausted. My head throbbed from the concussion. My legs buckled from fatigue and stress. I sat on a fallen log trying to gather my thoughts. Logic suggested I was disoriented from the blast, walking in circles due to a damaged vestibular system. But instinct screamed that the forest was alive, deliberately keeping me within its boundaries. Daylight began to fade earlier than usual. The sun was still high, but under the tree canopy, dusk was already gathering. I realized I had an hour at most before full darkness. I needed to find shelter or escape the forest at all costs. Delay meant death, or something worse. I chose a direction at random and pushed through the undergrowth, ignoring scratches from branches and thorns. The goal was to keep moving, not stop, not let the forest ensnare me with its spells. But the deeper I went, the thicker the darkness grew. The trees closed overhead in an impenetrable canopy, blocking every ray of sunlight. Soon, I heard familiar sounds. Footsteps, voices, the scrape of claws on bark. They were closing in from all sides, surrounding me in an invisible ring. I quickened my pace, then ran, tearing through thorny thickets, stumbling over roots and rocks. Behind me echoed laughter, my own laughter, repeated by dozens of voices. They were playing with me, like a cat with a mouse, offering hope of escape only to snatch it away. Suddenly the forest parted and I stumbled into a clearing. In its center stood another bunker, an exact replica of the one I'd destroyed hours ago. Even the sign bore the same number, 17. The door was wide open, warm yellow light from a kerosene lamp spilling from the window. It looked like an invitation, a promise of safety in the encroaching darkness. I knew it was a trap, but I had no choice. The forest behind me was alive with the sounds of pursuit, and ahead was the only shelter. Slowly, knife at the ready, I approached the entrance. Inside, everything was as before. The cot, the table with the radio, shelves with canned goods. Even my personal belongings were in their original places, as if the explosion had never happened. On the table lay a notebook, open to a blank page. Beside it, a pencil, as if someone expected me to continue the previous observer's records. I picked up the notebook and saw the last entry was in my handwriting. Day 5. Blew up the bunker. Tried to escape. Failed. They're stronger. Tomorrow, I'll try again. The date was yesterday's. But how? I hadn't written those words. Couldn't have. Or could I? My memory after the concussion was foggy. I might not remember everything. Perhaps this wasn't my first escape attempt. Perhaps I'd tried to flee this nightmare many times, always returning here, to observation post number 17. I flipped back through the notebook and recoiled in horror. Page after page, written in my handwriting, described the same events. Day 1, strange noises. Day 2, tracks around the bunker. Day 3, voices mimicking my speech. Over and over, with slight variations but always ending the same. Tomorrow I'll try to escape. How many times had I tried to leave this place? How many times had I blown up the bunker, run through the forest, found this shelter, and started again? Time here looped like a broken record, replaying the same events endlessly. I was trapped not just in space, but in time. The radio crackled to life on its own, and the familiar voice of the dispatcher came through. Observation post 17. Come in. Report the situation. I reached for the microphone reflexively, but stopped. How many times had I given this report? How many times had I received the same orders, responded with the same words? Observation post 17. Come in. The voice repeated. Morozov, report the situation. There was impatience in the dispatcher's tone, but also something else. A hint of mockery, as if he knew my predicament and was amused, forcing me to play this endless role. I picked up the microphone and slowly said, I know what's happening. I know this isn't the first time. How much longer will you torment me? Only static crackled in response. Then the dispatcher's voice, now different. Morozov, you're violating communication protocol. Report the situation as ordered. What protocol? I shouted into the mic. What orders? I'm dead. I've been dead for a long time. Don't you understand? This isn't real. But the response was the same insistent voice. Observation post 17. Report the situation. I threw the microphone to the floor, but the radio kept working. The dispatcher's voice grew louder, more demanding, insisting on a report. Other voices joined in. My battalion commander, the chief of staff, everyone I'd ever spoken to over the radio. They chanted in unison, demanding compliance, discipline, a situation report. I covered my ears, but the voices pierced directly into my brain. They grew louder until they became a deafening roar, bursting my eardrums. I fell to my knees, feeling blood trickle from my ears. The world around me blurred, losing definition. Then, everything stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard only my own heavy breathing. Slowly uncovering my ears, I looked around. The bunker was empty. The radio was silent. On the table lay the notebook, open to a blank page. Beside it, the pencil. I realized the cycle was starting again. How many had there been? How many more would there be? Perhaps the only way to break this time loop was to accept it, stop resisting, become part of this place, like Kovalev and the others. Maybe then the torment would end. But something in me rebelled against this thought. Some spark of humanity, unextinguished by fear, despair, or endless repetitions of this nightmare. I took the pencil and wrote in the notebook, My name is Alexei Morozov. I am alive. I will find a way out. Maybe in the next cycle this note would help me remember who I am and what's happening to me. Outside, a new night was beginning, or the same night repeating endlessly. I wasn't sure, but I was ready to face it. This time, I wouldn't hide. This time, I'd go out to meet them and try to understand what they really wanted from me. Itanana, Patri. I grabbed the kerosene lamp and stepped out of the bunker. The night air was thick and viscous like syrup, forcing me to cut through it with every movement. The forest greeted me with absolute silence. No rustle of leaves, no crack of twigs, not even the sound of my own footsteps. It was as if sound was absorbed by this unnatural darkness before it could spread. "I'm here," I said into the void, my voice muffled, like speaking into a pillow. "I'm not hiding anymore. Show yourselves." The lamp's light illuminated only a narrow circle around me, beyond which lay impenetrable blackness. But I felt watched. Countless eyes followed my every move, assessing, studying. The first of them appeared at the edge of the light circle. My doppelganger, now more refined, more real. Its facial features were sharper, its movements more natural. Only its eyes remained dead, glassy, reflecting the lamp's light like mirrors. Behind it, Kovalev stepped out of the darkness. Then another figure in military uniform I didn't recognize. Then another. Soon, I was surrounded by a crowd of soldiers. They wore uniforms from different eras, from old Soviet tunics to modern camouflage. Some bore wounds and mutilations, one missing half his face, another with shrapnel protruding from his chest, a third holding his own severed head. But all stared at me with the same expression, empty, lifeless, yet filled with a terrifying hunger. "We've been waiting for you," said my doppelganger, its voice now perfectly natural. "Waiting a long time. You've been more stubborn than the others. Usually 3 or 4 cycles are enough to break someone's will. But you've gone through 73. 73. So I hadn't been here for days or weeks, but months, maybe years. Time in this place flowed differently, and each cycle could last an eternity. "What do you want from me?" I asked, surprised by my own calm. Fear had vanished, replaced by indifference. Perhaps it was a sign of encroaching madness, or maybe the only way to preserve what was left of my sanity. "Why not just kill me and end it?" Kovalev laughed, a hoarse, inhuman sound. "Kill you? Why would we kill you? We're not murderers, Morozov. We're collectors. We gather souls, experiences, memories. Every soldier who comes here brings something unique. Your fears, your hopes, your memories of home, all become part of us." A figure I didn't recognize stepped forward. It was a young man, almost a boy, in a uniform from the Great Patriotic War. Half his face was scarred by burns, but he smiled with a childlike innocence. "I was here first," he said, his voice echoing like it came from a deep well. "In 1943, sent to watch German positions. There was no bunker then, just a trench. They found me on the 3rd night." "Who are they?" I asked, though I already knew the answer deep down. The young soldier's smile widened, revealing black holes where teeth should have been. "We don't know what we were once. Maybe we were human, like you. Maybe we were always here, in this forest, in this earth. The war awakened us. Blood and fear gave us strength. And lonely soldiers became our food." I began to understand. This place was a nexus, a point of attraction for entities that fed on human suffering. The war created perfect conditions: isolated observation posts, cut off soldiers, constant fear and tension. They didn't just kill, they consumed their victim's essence, adding them to their collection of souls. "But why the cycles?" I asked. "Why make me relive the same thing over and over?" My doppelganger tilted its head, as if considering the answer. "Because each time, you change a little. Each cycle adds new facets to your fear, new shades to your despair. We feed on those emotions, absorb them. And when you finally break, we take everything that's left of you." More figures began to gather around us. Soldiers from all eras and wars emerged from the darkness. Ancient warriors in chainmail to modern special forces. There were so many that the lamp's light couldn't encompass the crowd. All had once been human. All had come here in solitude and fear. All had become part of this nightmare. "Join us," said Kovalov, extending his hand. "Enough resisting. It's good here. No pain, no fear, no loneliness. You'll become part of something greater than yourself." His words were almost convincing. Why keep fighting this endless battle? Why cling to a life that had become an unending nightmare? But something in me resisted. Maybe it was the memory of home, of people I loved. Maybe it was just human pride, refusing to surrender without a fight. I looked at the dead soldiers surrounding me and said, "No, I won't become one of you." The crowd buzzed like an angry swarm of bees. Their faces twisted in furious grimaces. Hands reached for me. But I stood still, holding the lamp before me like a shield. "I know who you are," I said louder. "You're not what you pretend to be. You're parasites, feeding on fear. Without it, you're nothing." My doppelganger hissed, its face losing human features, morphing into something reptilian with an elongated snout and sharp teeth. "You understand nothing," it growled in a voice no longer mine. "We're older than your fears, older than your wars. We were here long before humans, and we'll be here after the last one vanishes from the earth." "Maybe," I agreed. "But right now, you depend on me, on my fear, my emotions, and I'm not afraid of you anymore." It was true. Somewhere during this conversation, fear had left me completely. All that remained was exhaustion and indifference. Perhaps that was the key to freedom. The creatures began to retreat, their forms growing less distinct as if dissolving into the darkness. "Without fear, we can't keep you here," my doppelganger whispered, its voice fading. "But you can't leave. This forest is part of you now. You'll always remember us." "Let me remember," I replied, "but I'll leave here alive." I turned my back on the crowd of phantoms and walked into the darkness. The lamp illuminated only a narrow path before my feet, but I didn't turn aside or look back. Behind me, the voices grew fainter until they dissolved into the night's silence. I walked for what felt like hours. Time didn't exist in this place, so I gauged it only by my exhaustion. Gradually, the forest began to change. The trees became ordinary pines and firs, not the grim giants that surrounded the cursed clearing. The air filled with normal forest smells: resin, moss, decaying leaves. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and that natural sound was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Dawn caught me at the forest's edge. Ahead stretched the familiar valley, and beyond it, the rooftops of the settlement where our headquarters was located. I turned and looked at the forest. It looked entirely ordinary. Dense green canopies, sunlight filtering through leaves, birds flitting from branch to branch. Nothing hinted at the nightmare I'd endured, but I knew it was real. The scars on my hands from the broken glass, the torn and dirty uniform, the indelible images of dead soldiers and their inhuman voices, all confirmed it. I couldn't say how long I'd been in that forest. Maybe a week, as originally planned, maybe months or years. Time there flowed differently. The walk to headquarters took about an hour. The soldiers at the checkpoint looked at me with surprise. My appearance must have been shocking. The duty officer initially didn't believe I was Morozov, the one who'd gone to the observation post a week ago. I had to show my documents and answer questions about personal details. "Where have you been all this time?" asked Major Semenov, our battalion commander. "We sent a search party to your post 3 days ago. The bunker was destroyed, no trace of you. We thought you were dead." 3 days. So in the real world, Only 3 days had passed through all my cycles. Time in that place truly worked differently. I tried to tell the Major what happened, but my story sounded like the ravings of a madman. Ghostly soldiers, time loops, ancient entities feeding on fear. It was too unbelievable for someone who'd never experienced it. He sent me to the military doctor for examination. Dr. Volkov, an experienced medic who'd seen many strange cases, listened to my story carefully, examined my scars and bruises, checked my reflexes and mental state. Concussion was his verdict. Severe concussion with hallucinations and disorientation, common after close explosions. You need rest and treatment. Maybe he was right. Maybe everything I experienced was a product of a brain rattled by the blast. But deep down, I knew the truth. What happened in the forest was real. Not the kind of reality you can touch or measure, but a reality existing in the thin layer between our world and something else. They sent me to a hospital, then home on medical leave. Officially, I was concussed during a combat mission. Observation Post 17 was decommissioned as destroyed. No one was sent there again. Maybe the need for observation had ended. Or maybe someone in command knew more about that place than they let on. At home, I struggled to adjust to normal life. Every night, I woke in a cold sweat, listening for sounds outside. Sometimes, I thought I heard familiar voices calling my name. But over time, those sensations faded, then disappeared. Life returned to normal. I went back to service, got promoted, married, had children. Years passed, and the nightmare of Observation Post 17 began to feel like a distant dream. I'd tell the story to close friends, framing it as a war tale or legend. Most laughed, assuming it was fiction or a result of combat stress. But a few years ago, I learned something that made me believe again. At a military reunion, a former comrade shared a strange story. In the same forest where Observation Post 17 stood, locals occasionally found human remains in military uniforms. The remains belonged to soldiers from different eras, from the Great Patriotic War to modern times. All were found alone, with no signs of struggle or violent death, as if they'd simply lain down and never woke up. Local authorities attributed it to accidents, lost tourists, or deserters, but the number of finds was too high for coincidence. Recently, I read an online post that chilled me. A blogger interested in anomalous zones posted photos from that forest. One showed a restored bunker with a sign reading Observation Post number 17. Locals told him the place had a bad reputation, with voices and strange figures in military uniforms reported periodically. The worst part was that the blogger planned to spend a night there to debunk another urban legend. I tried to contact him online to warn him, but it was too late. His social media stopped updating after he went into the forest. Now I know those entities are still there, waiting for new victims, new lonely travelers to lure into their trap. The bunker rebuilds itself, the time loops continue, and the collection of souls grows. I escaped, not because I was stronger or smarter than the others. I was just lucky enough to realize they feed on fear, and without it, they're powerless. But this knowledge doesn't bring me peace. Every night, closing my eyes, I see the faces of those dead soldiers. They stare at me with silent reproach, as if blaming me for abandoning them. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should have found a way to free them all, not just myself. But I didn't have the strength for more. Sometimes I feel this isn't the end of the story. That one day, I'll receive orders to return to that place, or I'll get lost in the forest, or I won't resist the call I still hear on the quietest nights. And then I'll be back in Observation Post 17 with the radio, the notebook, and the kerosene lamp. and it will all start again. But while I'm here, in the world of the living, I will remember. Remember those who stayed in the forest, those who might still go there, and that some places on earth are better avoided, because there are things worse than death, and one of them is an eternity spent in the company of your own fears.